I am Ron, 34 years old. I live in a small town, nothing too fancy, just an ordinary place where most people know each other, but aren't particularly close. I have been working at the same company for the past 8 years. It's one of those jobs that pays the bills, you know, nothing exciting, but stable. My boss, Mr. Collins, is the kind of person you don't want to mess with. He's tough, no nonsense, and, to be honest, he doesn't tolerate any laziness. I'm used to him giving orders, and I never really think much about it. Then, one day, like any other day at the office, everything changed. I didn't expect it. Mr. Collins, with his usual strict tone, called me into his office. When I walked in, he barely lifted his head from his desk. His glasses rested on the bridge of his nose as he flipped through some papers, probably handling something important. But then, without even looking at me, he said, "Ron, I need you to do me a favor." I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what was happening. "Of course, Mr. Collins. What do you need?" He glanced up briefly, his face as serious as ever. "My wife, Kaylee, needs a ride home. She's been at the office, and I have an unexpected meeting, so I can't pick her up. You're the closest person, so you'll do it." I wasn't exactly thrilled about it, but this was one of those things, you don't ask questions when the boss tells you to do something. You just do it. "Yes, Mr. Collins," I replied. "Good," he said, returning to his paperwork. "Don't waste any time. Now, let me tell you about Kaylee. I had seen her around the office a few times, but we didn't really know each other. She was Mr. Collins' wife, so I guess you could say she was like one of those distant figures. You knew she existed, but you never really interacted with her. She was beautiful, of course. Everyone knew that. But to be honest, I never thought much about her. She was just another part of Mr. Collins' world, and I never considered anything special about her, at least, not beyond the surface. So, I went to my car and waited for her. It felt a little strange because this wasn't something I usually did. Most of my interactions with the boss's wife were nothing more than polite nods when passing her in the hallway. But now, I was going to drive her home. It was fine, just another task on the to-do list. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. When she walked out of the building, I wasn't sure what to expect. Kaylee looked different from how I remembered, maybe because she wasn't in the office setting. She seemed more relaxed, more approachable. She smiled at me as she got into the car, and I immediately felt a little awkward. Not uncomfortable, exactly. I just didn't know how to act. We started driving, and for the first few minutes, there was only silence. I wasn't sure if I should say something, so I just focused on the road. I tried not to make it weird, but it was hard to ignore the fact that this wasn't just a normal ride. Mrs. Collins was sitting next to me, someone I barely knew but had seen for years. I didn't want to do anything to make her feel uncomfortable. And then, suddenly, she spoke. "How's everything, Ron?" she asked, her voice warm and friendly. I wasn't expecting that. I didn't even know what to say. Yeah. Everything's fine. Just normal, you know," I answered awkwardly. She smiled again. "You've been working with my husband for a long time, huh?" "Yeah. 8 years now," I said, feeling a little more at ease. "That's a long time." She nodded thoughtfully. And then, she surprised me. She actually started talking about her life, not in the way most people talk about work or their family, but in a way that felt real, as if she was letting me into her world for a moment. She told me how hard it was to keep up with everything, especially with Mr. Collins always being so busy. "I know people think my life is perfect, but it's really not," she said softly, looking out the window. "I've spent so much time alone, waiting for him to notice me, but I can't even remember the last time I actually felt happy." She sighed, almost as if she was talking to herself. I didn't know how to respond to that. It felt like I was hearing a side of her that no one else had ever seen. I never expected Kaylee, of all people, to open up about her struggles. But it was clear she wasn't just the perfect wife of a successful businessman. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. And that's when I realized, this simple ride home, this small favor, was about to lead to something I never could have predicted. But at that moment, I had no idea what was coming next. That's how it all started. I didn't know how to react. The more she spoke, the more I realized that Kaylee wasn't the woman I had imagined. And maybe that's what made what happened next so shocking. We drove down the road, and the silence between us faded. I was comfortable now. As she talked, she wasn't distant or cold like I had assumed, she was real, a person with her own struggles, her own story. But then, just as I started to settle into the conversation, she said something that made me freeze for a second. "Ron," she started, her voice softer, almost like she was testing the waters. "Do you ever miss simpler days? You know, when we were younger, when life wasn't so complicated?" I looked at her for a moment, unsure of what she was really asking. "I guess," I said, not sure what else to say. "I mean, things were different when I was younger." She smiled, a knowing smile. "I'm not that much older than you," she said, raising an eyebrow. "I know I'm married, but sometimes I think about how much I miss just doing normal things. You know, hanging out with friends, going to the movies, taking a walk in the park. Just doing things for fun. Just living." That's when I realized, she wasn't just making small talk. She was serious. "Why not?" she continued, her eyes shining with a playful glint. "Collins is going on a business trip next week. Maybe we could hang out, just do something simple, like we're teenagers again. See a movie, go for a walk in the park, have a picnic. Just enjoy a day like normal people." I almost forgot to breathe. "Wait, what?" I stared at her, confused. "You want me to hang out with you?" She gave a soft laugh, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Yeah. Why not? I'm sure you're busy with work and everything, but I think it could be fun. We could go see a movie, grab a coffee, take a walk, just do anything. I just think it'd be nice to spend a day with someone who isn't too caught up in life." I could feel my heartbeat pick up. This was unexpected. I never thought she would suggest something like this, not in a million years. Kaylee, beautiful, sophisticated, married to one of the most powerful men in the company. Why would she want to spend time with someone like me? This is a direct and natural English translation of your text, while maintaining the storytelling tone. Let me know if you'd like any refinements. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since the car ride with Kaylee. I was convinced that it was all just a joke, maybe a test or a game she was playing. I hadn't heard anything from her since that conversation, and nothing at work seemed to have changed. It was as if nothing had happened at all. I went back to my usual routine, pretending that it had just been a strange, awkward moment that never really mattered. But then it happened. Mr. Collins went on a business trip, just as Kaylee had mentioned, and that's when I got the message. It came to my phone around noon, just as I was finishing up a report. The notification popped up, and when I saw the name, my stomach dropped. Oh. Was my proposal approved? No, it was from Kaylee. I froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. My heart started pounding, just like it had in that car, listening to her talk about our plans for the outing. I didn't know if she was serious or if this was just another joke, some kind of test to see if I'd actually go along with her offer. I just stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to ignore it. But then I realized that if I did, it would only make things worse. Maybe she was just being friendly. Or maybe she was hoping I'd say yes. I still wasn't sure what to think. So I replied. I guess it was time to find out. I sent it without thinking too much. But the moment I hit send, I regretted it. I was nervous, unsure of what I was doing. But before I could second-guess myself, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Kaylee. Then another. And another. She kept texting me, about the details, asking if I had thought it through, reminding me of the time, even suggesting we go to her favorite spot in the park. I kept getting these messages, each ping pulling me in deeper. After what felt like hours, my phone rang. I stared at it for a moment, and before I even realized it was her calling, I hesitated, biting my lip. But against my better judgment, I answered. "Hey, Ron." Her voice was warm, teasing. "I thought you'd be braver than this. Are you really in such bad shape, or are you just too scared?" I tried to keep my composure, but I could feel my heart racing. "Kaylee, I don't know about this," I admitted. "I mean, I never thought you were serious. And now? I don't even know if this is real. I'm not sure I should go." She laughed softly. "I thought you were bolder than this. Come on, Ron, it'll be fun. It's just a day out. We're not breaking any rules, right? So let's go. Everything's already set up, and I've just been waiting for you to say yes." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then, finally, I sighed. "Fine. Let's do it. But just one day, okay? Nothing crazy. Just a normal day." Her voice brightened immediately, and I could practically hear her smiling through the phone. "Great. I'll pick you up in an hour." I didn't know why I agreed. But something inside me wanted to. I felt like I was stepping into something I couldn't escape. But at the same time, there was this strange excitement, maybe the thrill of doing something different, something forbidden. Or maybe it was just the way she made everything seem so simple, so innocent. By the time the hour was up, I was standing outside, waiting for the car to pull up. I had no idea what to expect. She looked stunning, as always, dressed casually in a way that made her seem more like a regular person than the wife of a wealthy man. She smiled at me as I climbed into the passenger seat. We wasted no time. First, we went to the movies, just as she had planned. We watched a film neither of us really cared about, but that wasn't the point. We laughed about it afterward, joking about the silliest scenes, pretending to be critics. Then, she suggested a walk in the park. As we strolled along the paths, she seemed so carefree, a lightness in her step that I had never seen before. And then, suddenly, she took my hand. At first, I froze, unsure of what to do. My mind raced, my heart pounded in my chest. But I didn't pull away. Instead, I walked beside her, wondering if I was dreaming, or if this was really happening. Was she really holding my hand? Was this real? We walked for a while, and before I knew it, we had arrived at a spot in the park that overlooked the town. It was a quiet, secluded area where you could see everything below, the city lights flickering in the distance. As the sun started to set, we sat down on a bench. She turned to me, her eyes shimmering in the fading light. "It's funny, isn't it?" she said softly. "The way we think we have everything figured out. And then we realize we're just as lost as everyone else. People think I have it all, but sometimes I wonder if I even remember what happiness really feels like." I didn't know how to respond. I just sat there, listening as she talked about her life, her marriage, how she felt isolated even though she had everything. I could tell she was opening up in a way she never had before. And for a moment, I didn't feel like just an employee. I felt like someone she could trust. I didn't know what this day meant, but one thing was clear, my life had changed. I had no idea how this would end or what would happen next. But I couldn't deny that I was drawn in, like a teenager again, carefree, excited, and a little scared. But I knew one thing for sure, nothing would ever be the same. We sat there for a while, the city lights stretching out beneath us. The sky had turned completely dark now, the air cool, the park quiet except for the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. The moment felt heavy, almost magical. Kaylee, always composed, was the first to break the silence. "I've been thinking a lot today," she began, her voice gentle, almost sad. "I can't even remember the last time I did something this simple, you know? Like when I was younger, when everything seemed so easy. I used to just hang out with my friends and do stupid things without worrying about the consequences. But now it feels like life is always demanding something from me." She paused, staring at the ground, lost in thought. I've always had everything I wanted, but sometimes I miss feeling free. I miss feeling like nothing could go wrong. I didn't know how to react. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had always assumed that people with money, especially someone like her, married to the richest man in town, didn't have these kinds of worries. Everything was supposed to be perfect. But I couldn't deny what I was hearing. Having everything didn't mean having everything she needed. I cleared my throat before speaking. But Kaylee, being the wife of the richest man in town, doesn't that make everything easier? I mean, you have the freedom to go anywhere, do anything. You can eat at the best places, stay in the nicest hotels. Doesn't that make up for it? Her lips curled into a small, sad smile as she shook her head. You think so? But it's not about money, Ron. It's about feeling something real. Something no amount of wealth can replace. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Before I could say anything else, she looked at me with a tenderness that caught me off guard. Thank you, she whispered. For doing this. For coming with me. It means more than you know. And then, to my complete shock, she leaned in, gently cupping my face. And kissed me. We walked back to her car, neither of us saying much. Tonight felt heavier, as if the kiss had marked a shift in our relationship, one that neither of us was quite ready to understand. When we reached the car, she turned to look at me one last time, her smile a little more genuine than it had been all day. Thank you, Ron. Again, for everything, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded quickly, my throat tight. Anytime, Kay. As she drove away, I stood there watching her taillights fade into the night. My mind was racing, replaying everything that had happened. This wasn't just a friendly outing anymore. This was something deeper, something I wasn't sure I was ready for. But I couldn't deny the pull, the curiosity, the connection. And as I walked back to my apartment that night, I realized that whatever this was, it was only just beginning. A week had passed since that night on the hill. Mr. Collins had returned from his business trip, and work life went on as usual. Nothing had changed, at least on the surface. Kay and I kept our distance, exchanging only brief, polite interactions when necessary. I convinced myself that whatever had happened that evening was just a fleeting moment, a temporary escape for her, nothing more. And then, one night, everything changed. I had just gotten home from a long day at work. Kicking off my shoes, I sank into my chair and turned on the TV, hoping to shut my brain off for a while. It was too late for visitors, so when the doorbell rang, my heart pounded. I hesitated for a second before getting up and walking to the door. When I opened it, I froze. Kaylee stood there, holding 2 suitcases. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her expression both exhausted and determined. Kay? I said, completely caught off guard. What are you doing here? She sighed, as if she had been holding her breath the entire way. I left him, she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. I can't do it anymore, Ron. I don't want that life. I don't want the fake money, the fake smiles, the empty house. I don't want to be someone I'm not. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. You left him? She nodded, gripping the suitcase handles tightly. I packed my bags and told them I was done. I couldn't pretend anymore. I didn't tell him where I was going. I just walked out. I ran. I ran a hand down my face, my mind racing. Kay, do you know what this means? Do you know what's going to happen? If he finds out you're here. He won't, she said quickly. At least, not right away. And when he does, I'll deal with it. But right now, I need to be somewhere real. With someone who makes me feel real. I felt the air leave my lungs. This was insane. Just a week ago, we were 2 people living completely separate lives. And now, she was standing in front of me, telling me she had left her husband, one of the most powerful men in the city. For what? For me? This isn't a small thing, Kay, I said, struggling to find the right words. I mean, what do you expect to happen now? Do you really think you can just walk away from that life and everything will be fine? I don't know, she admitted. I just know I can't go back. And I don't want to. I let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. My job. My life. Everything I had built. It could all come crashing down if this went wrong. And yet, looking at her standing there, so vulnerable yet so certain of what she wanted, I couldn't bring myself to turn her away. Come inside, I finally said, stepping aside. She looked at me for a second, as if making sure I really meant it. Then she lifted her suitcases and stepped in. As I closed the door behind her, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about her leaving Collins. This was about what came next. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. If you had told me a few months ago that I would be living with Kaylee Collins, my boss's wife, I would have laughed in your face. But now, here I was. I still went to work, expecting every day to be my last. I figured Collins would eventually figure out where Kay had gone, that he would put the pieces together. That one morning, he would walk into the office, call me in, and fire me on the spot. But nothing happened. Kay had been telling the truth. She had never told him where she went. And Collins didn't even seem to care. He was moodier than usual, barking orders and slamming desks. His office door stayed shut. But he never mentioned Kay. Never asked anyone to look for her. It was as if he had erased her from his life. That should have made me feel relieved. But instead, it just made me angry. After years of marriage, after building a life together, he didn't even try to get her back. Kay had been right all along. She had been nothing more than another piece of furniture in his world, the ideal wife who had finally had enough. One morning, I walked into Collins's office and handed in my resignation. Any particular reason? Collins asked, not even looking up. I just think it's time to move on, I said simply. He shrugged. Suit yourself. And that was it. No accusations. No questions. No second thoughts. That night, I came home. Kay was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. When she looked up and saw me, her face lit up like it always did. You're home early, she said, smiling. I took a deep breath and walked up behind her, wrapping my arms around her. I quit. Her eyes widened. Wait. I quit my job, I repeated, grinning. I don't need it. I don't need him. I just need us. For a second, she just stared at me. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. And for the first time, I felt free.